Good morning and welcome back, Drive Tribe. We are here. We are having fun. It is 5:45. I did not set up an event last night. Having a little back pain, but that's okay. We're going to get through it together, and we are going to talk about a topic that I hit on the other day, which was the power of great questions. Have you ever noticed how a great question can really change the situation? It can open you up to new thoughts, to a new way of thinking, and it can really set the tone for you and your perspective, and adjust that in the moment. And those great questions are what leads to great ideas, which ultimately lead to great successes. So, and taking great action. So let's think about this. I don't want you to just be in a situation where you're asking good questions. I want to go to the great questions. And so, what I want to do is talk about using the power of storytelling, some questions that were asked in the past that led to greatness. So, let's get an example here. So, back in the early 1900s, everybody was asking, how could we build, not everybody, but the folks that were in this industry were asking, how can we build a stronger flying machine? But instead of looking at it that way, the Wright brothers flipped the script and said, how do birds stay in the air? And the idea behind that was, let's examine the balance and control of birds and how they stay aflight or stay in flight, and use that in their planning for how to build a better airplane, which ultimately led them, obviously, to being able to fly. And part of that was the wing design and modifying the wing design. And I apologize while I'm doing silly things while we're talking, because I'm not supposed to be doing that, but we're going to do it anyway because I want to look better for you, or as good as I can. So that's the power of a great question, right? Is you can go from, hey, just being like everybody else, to doing something a little differently, to really changing the entire outlook on a particular circumstance. So how do you ask great questions? To ask great questions, you want to ask questions that shift the perspective. So if you think about it, I've faced a few of these situations recently where you're in a circumstance, you could get into the why me, why is this happening to me? Why is it always me? And that is the kind of message of for lack of a better term, and I'm sorry to say this, a loser. Like if we're losing when we're asking questions like, why is this happening to me? Because we're all going to face challenges. We're always going to face some suffering in this life, because we have to. And we can talk about that from a faith-based circumstance, but we can also talk about that just from the natural order of the universe here, is that you're always going to face something, and it's going to be 10% about what happens to you and 90% about how you react to what happens to you that determines your success or failure. So flip the script on that. Why is this happening to me becomes, what is this teaching me? What can I learn from this? How can this make me better? How can I be better the next time? I had an hour-long discussion about a circumstance at work where, with a friend of mine, and we were talking, and it's we used the analogy, we've gotten to the root of the problem, we've solved the root of the problem, and after you've solved that root cause, the things that happened after that were just symptoms that hadn't appeared yet, right? And so all we were doing is fighting those little symptoms that hadn't appeared yet, and we're beating those down. But we had to keep the customer calm and say, hey, we've gotten to the root cause. We've driven out the root cause, but there's still these little tendrils of things that we've got to work through from here to the next order or next thing we ship you. But while we deal with these little tendrils, don't lose sight of the fact we've solved the root problem, and that's an important mindset to keep as you go through problems. You're going to solve the problem, and then it's going to feel like somebody just kicked you because you didn't, because you fall back one more time or something else comes up. That's okay. You'll get through it. And then instead of can we do this, you ask questions like, how can we make this work, right? Or should we? There's another. That's always another question: is should we be working on this problem? So you need to ask questions that change the game, and we're going to talk about one later that really reframed an entire circumstance that can save lives as well. Actually, a couple of examples. So, and then you ask questions that empower others. So if you think about Phil Jackson, who was the coach for the Chicago Bulls and then later the coach for the LA Lakers during the Kobe and Shaq era, he didn't ask, how do we win more games? He asked, how do we build a team where everyone makes each other better? So if you think about that Bulls team, they ran the triangle offense, and it was all about getting good looks at the basket and getting a free flow of three options at all times, so that you had the opportunity to score. Another thing that was there is they looked at people like Dennis Rodman as filling a role. So you were looking at how can these parts fit together, and you may think your favorite puzzle piece is the edge piece, right? But if all you ever have is edge pieces, you'll never put the whole puzzle together. So at times you've got to ask, how do these puzzle pieces fit together? And how, as a great leader, do I empower the people to do the things I need them to do, and not just all look like me or be like me, but instead fill the roles that are needed on the team. And then finally, you ask questions that spark growth. What's one thing we can do better? What's stopping us from moving forward? Who on my team needs a new challenge? You got to be thinking that internally and introspectively. Trust your team members, but part of being a leader is you have to, at times, go to other leaders to have discussions and then bring that back to your team. So always be improving, always be growing in order to make the team more successful. So let me tell you kind of an interesting story. It was a single question that changed the lives of a group of people that were facing death and were facing mission failure. So let's talk about that. The simple question was, how can we fit a square peg into a round hole? Square peg into a round hole. So what happened? On April 13th, 1970, 2 days into their mission to the moon, Apollo 13 astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes faced a life-threatening emergency. An oxygen tank had exploded that was in the service module, and it crippled their spacecraft. It knocked out much of their power, but also left them severely limited on oxygen. So all the survivors on the crew had to retreat into the lunar module called the Aquarius, and it was designed to support 2 astronauts for 2 days, not 3 astronauts for 4 days. So you can see the math problem that's immediately coming here. They're exhaling carbon dioxide, and the air inside the module is becoming increasingly toxic, and they needed a way to use lithium hydroxide canisters to scrub the CO2 from the air. But those were designed for the command module, the Odyssey, and they were square, while the receptacles in the lunar module were round. Square peg, round hole. You can see where we're going here. So the deadly CO2 problem is their problem. That's what they're facing, the buildup. And without a way to fit these square canisters into the round openings, the crew really faced a slow suffocation, and nobody wanted that, obviously. So the engineers of NASA and Mission Control in Houston needed to improvise a solution, and they needed to do it based on the materials they had on hand. So what was the question that really sparked a life-saving solution? One of the engineers, seeing the mismatch, just frankly put it, how can we fit a square peg into a round hole? Many of us as a child face that question frequently. So it wasn't rhetorical. It was a challenge to the entire team to think outside the box, create this improvised solution as basically a air filter adapter using whatever they had on board. And the solution was a makeshift air filter. The NASA engineers devised this solution using plastic covers from the flight manuals, socks, and a spacesuit hose, and of course, duct tape. By doing that, they relayed the steps, step by step, up to the crew on the lunar module, and they built a contraption inside the module, and that makeshift adapter allowed them to put these square command module filters, connect those to the lunar module's round opening. Of course, saving all on board, and the CO2 levels came down. And over the next several days, Mission Control and Apollo 13 crew worked together to solve additional challenges, including navigation and power shortages. And the damaged spacecraft was able to land back on Earth on April 17th, 1970. Splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean, and all three astronauts survived. So why did the questions matter? It really is about shifting your perspective. So what did they do? They said, okay, let's boil this down to the simplest thing. How do we get this square peg in this round hole? And while we, looking back, have hindsight being 2020, it sometimes what will happen when you're in a panic situation or when you're in a high stress situation, you forget the simplest things and you dismiss out of hand the best solution. You say, hey, that's not even an option. Well, it's square and that one's round. That's not going to work. I got to come up with something else. And then you spend a lot of time trying to generate other leads or ideas or concepts when you had the solution in hand all along. So let me give you some more examples. There was the Socratic questioning that led to democracy. So Socrates asked a question in ancient Greece, what is justice? And he was relentless in those questions, right? Is always asking the follow-up, asking the next one, asking the next one. And by doing that, he builds critical thinking. And in this case, he was doing it in his classrooms, the Socratic method, that ultimately led to asking questions like, what is justice? You know, in the past life, you would have had kings and queens and monarchies, and what Socrates was able to do is highlight the opportunity for the people that ultimately are going to be doing a lot of the work in those monarchies to have a voice and to build a world where everybody's opinion matters. Einstein, for example, he had a thought experiment. His was, what would happen if I rode a beam of light? And that was how he ultimately was able to come up with the idea for relativity. Another one, the Manhattan Project. Is it possible to build an atomic bomb? I mean, at times I would have said, well, what is an atomic bomb, right? That'd be the first question. But is it possible to build it? That was there was a letter written from Einstein and Slizard to FDR, and that led to the Manhattan Project and ultimately changed World War II and global politics. Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, you may have opinions of what that led to being evil. It certainly wasn't necessarily a good thing that people in Japan suffered from the atomic bomb, or that we have atomic bombs now, and there's all that sort of thing. But it certainly was world changing in the idea in and of itself, and ultimately, I believe some of that same technology led to fission reactors that led us to nuclear reactors, and now pursuing fusion as an option. Another one that changed the U.S. civil rights movement, Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? And that one led to many challenges. It challenged the racial and gender discrimination with just one simple question. And then we've already hit on the one for Apollo 13. I want to hit on one or two more here. Here's a question that inspired the computer revolution. If you ever went to Spaceship Earth at Disney World, you've heard the story of the computer being built in the garage. And the real question here was, what if we made computing personal? And that was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who worked together to build the Apple I, and later the Macintosh computer. And that ultimately revolutionized what we know as personal computing. And one more that really saved lives. Think about disease, right? When we think about the flu, COVID, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, all the things that existed, some of these diseases that still exist, but are much less prevalent now than they were in the past. There was a time when it was, how do we help heal people from measles, mumps, rubella, polio, tetanus? Like, how can we treat the disease? But then, for example, with polio, there was the question, could we create a vaccine using a weakened virus? I would take that question a step further. What would happen if nobody ever got the disease? So that's really the question of, some of these vaccines, and that was Janice Salick, and the question led ultimately, can we create a vaccine using a weakened virus? Ultimately led to the polio vaccine, which has saved countless lives and livelihoods. It used to be very common that an iron lung was a thing that had to be in every hospital, and multiple of them, because the polio disease would ultimately cause paralysis of the diaphragm. But again, the question there is, what if you never even got it? What if you never got the disease at all? And so then you go, okay, well, can we make a vaccine for polio? And then they do, and then you change the view of the world. It's almost like polio is not even treated as a disease in the U.S. anymore because we have the polio vaccine. And ultimately led to the industry of the folks that work on and build iron lungs essentially being down to like nothing. And there's actually a guy that's an accountant who had polio when he was real young and is still in an iron lung, and they have to find people that can actually work on it. But so what are all those stories? Why did I tell you those stories? Those are the powers of great questions. When you ask a great question as a leader, you refocus and you shift the mindset of everybody in the room towards what's really important. So I would say this: think about what is the right question to be asking. If you're in sales, what are we selling to our customer? What do they care about? Like, what is our brand promise? What are we saying that we care about, and why would our customer want to buy from us over someone else? So make sure you're asking those right questions. So over the next few days, possibly week, I'm going to be posting on the page, in the stories and in my in post, some great questions that I've worked with, to type in the right prompts to ChatGPT and thought about myself, and just try to give you a list, depending on the circumstances you're facing, the situations you're in, of some great questions you can ask yourself and you can ask others. Some may be a conversation starter. Some may just be about personal improvement. But I'll post those just so you have some great questions as examples for how you can ask better questions. And I would love to hear, your reaction and some conversation around that. So I would encourage you over the next 24 hours, just as an experiment. You don't get better if you don't practice. I would encourage you to go out and think about the questions that you ask and being intentional. Ask open-ended questions. Don't always ask yes or no questions, because that doesn't drive a lot of critical thinking. So when you're talking to your team members, you're talking to your family, your friends, if you want to have a good conversation, ask open-ended questions. Then try to see if you can shift and unlock new solutions through those questions. And then, of course, drop a comment, like, subscribe, all the things, the people on YouTube and Facebook say. I don't say that enough, I'm sure. But now let's transition to the verse of the day. The verse of the day says, from Proverbs 18:15, the heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. So what does that mean? Let's go in here to the Logos Bible app and have a little time to think about that. On its face, it's pretty obvious. And I think even though it's derivative, I'll use Ted Lasso as an example here. Ted Lasso, if you haven't seen it, apologize for the spoilers. You should watch it. It's still good anyway. There is a scene in there where he gets hired by divorcee to come and coach a soccer team, and she's really trying to ruin the soccer team because she hires a American football coach to come coach soccer in England. But Ted is a positive person, just constantly very positive. And Ted's in a bar playing darts, and the old owner comes in, and him and Ted are talking, and the guy wants to bet him, hey, I'm gonna get a shot to sit in the suite next to my ex-wife and aggravate her, basically, with his new girlfriend. And Ted's like, okay, I'll take that bet. Well, they start throwing darts, and Ted goes, "Oh, I remember I'm left-handed." Kind of funny. But he also quotes a poem that is attributed to Walt Whitman. As he's about to win the game, he says, I read this quote, and it said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And he said, if you were curious, you may have asked me, "Have you played a lot of darts, Ted?" And he said he'd tell you, he played at a sports bar with his dad every day since he was 16 or until his dad passed. So the point of the proverb and the point of that statement is that you should be curious. You should seek out wisdom. You should seek out knowledge. And a wise person does that, and they have the ears to hear the knowledge and the wisdom that's there. In spiritual terms, you should be seeking your wisdom from the Word of God, which is the Bible, and you should be reading the text and trying to understand it in context of when it occurred. And in the business world and in the world around you, you should be seeking the knowledge from those who have gone before you and have experienced things that maybe you've never experienced. You should temper that with your own experiences, but that's why you need to ask great questions, is so that you can draw out that knowledge and those things from others, and not assume that you know everything. You do not have to be the smartest person in the room to be the most successful. In fact, a lot of smart people get caught up and tripped up by the belief that they need to be smarter than everybody, and they're too embarrassed and not humble enough to accept advice and commentary from others. They'll either talk themselves out of it or won't ask enough questions. They're just looking for confirmation. So don't have bias in those conversations. Go into conversations with open ears, open eyes, and an open heart to learn from others, because I promise you the collective we of everyone around you can outthink you individually. So use all of the things that you're good at, and then get some information from others. Make sure you're asking great questions, and you'll ultimately win more times than not. So that's been the show for today, is the power of a good question. And with that, I'll leave you with our statement: make good choices so you don't have to make bad excuses. You're going to be successful. You're going to go out, you're going to do the right things. Shift your perspective, shift how you ask questions, continue to love on others and learn from others. I want you to be successful. I want you to have a great year, and I know you're going to do that. I want you to have a great life. If you have any questions for us, or the comments are always open, we love to hear from you. We will comment back. We like messages. If you want to send us a message, go ahead. Share with your friends if you're finding any value in what we're doing here. And if you have ideas for the show, glad to hear those too. But our time has come to a close, and we don't say goodbye here. We say see you real soon, because
at the end of the day, the day gotta end.